We now move to the next session. I request Varadaji to kindly come. Her session is Rashtriya Kirtan, the unknown story of the Indian freedom struggle. Let's welcome her onto a fantastic journey. Varadaji is a junior research fellow at Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, New Delhi. She's been teaching as an assistant prof at Maharashtra National Law University, Mumbai since 2015. Her subject domain is political science, and her research focuses on bhakti practices mainly in Maharashtra. Her research interests include political theory, Indian political thought, religion and politics, law and governance, and of course, storytelling. Over to you, Vardaji.
Uh, Suprabhatam to all, and thank you, Shivkumar ji, for this introduction. Thank you, organizers, for giving me the opportunity to present my paper and my recent work, which I'm doing at Teen Murti, Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. It is based on the tradition of Kirtan and intersection of Kirtan with history, political science, sociology. So that's what I'm working on recently. I feel a little nervous at the beginning because such a luminous gathering here at this morning. I have been listening to the presentations. So some personal stories are there, some performing artists are also conveying their stories. I come purely from academic background, but I can take little advantage of being a teacher myself. So teachers are inherently storytellers. So with this, let me start sharing my screen. As Shiv Kumar ji mentioned, the title of the paper is Rashtriya Kirtan, an unknown story of Indian freedom struggle. Let's begin with one of the very important sutras, which comes from Narada Bhakti Sutra. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam Padasevanam Archanam Vandanam Dasyam Sakhyamatma Nivedanam. So these are the ninefold paths or nine ways of bhakti, Navavidha Bhakti they are called. And as we can see here, Kirtan is accorded second position or second place, or Kirtan comes immediately after Shravanam. And that's in Indian tradition is the importance of Kirtan. So Kirtan, the moment we think of Kirtan, it is essentially connected to bhakti. So if we take away the essence of bhakti from Kirtan, it cannot be considered as Kirtan. And how then it connects itself to Rashtra Bhakti or Desha Bhakti, that is what I'm going to talk about in today's presentation. So this is the outline of my presentation. To begin with, as a researcher, as an academician, the question that I often ponder upon, and especially when we are celebrating 75 years of our independence this year, we realize that some of the stories of our freedom struggle, some of the efforts of freedom struggle, and so many participants, so many people contributed in their own ways to achieve freedom. The question is why some of the stories, why some of these great stories are missing from our dominant discourse. So that's my first reflection. Then we will see what is the Kirtan tradition, and Kirtan tradition particularly in Maharashtra. Then we move on to understanding what is Rashtriya Kirtan, what was the context and the meaning in which Rashtriya Kirtan evolved. We will come to the contributions of Lokmanya Tilak and foundations of Rashtriya Kirtan. I will briefly talk about Dr. Dattopant Patwardhan, who is considered as Adya Rashtriya Kirtankar, the first Rashtriya Kirtankar. And then we will conclude with what are the contributions of Rashtriya Kirtan. So first question first, why some stories are missing from our dominant discourse of freedom struggle? So broadly speaking, again, we can go into multiple reasons, but broadly speaking, these reasons can be classified into two main possibilities or two main reasons. The first reason could be ideological reason, and the second is methodological reason. So immediately after independence, and even today, we have lots of talk of secularism. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the moment we talk of Kirtan, we talk about bhakti. and bhakti being associated with something like religion, and the state is supposed to be secular state which has nothing to do and which is supposed to not have anything to do with religion. And that is a typically Western adopted notion of secularism that we adopted in our context. In Indian context, I don't know whether to call it unfortunate, but in my understanding, it was not something that fitted very well the Indian context. So this ideology of secularism, this separation, this hangover, the colonial hangover, from where we also adopted the relationship of state with religion and people's faith systems, this segregation of religion and state, that was one of the reasons that the dominant discourse or the government history writing project completely brushed away anything that had to do with religion. And obviously, Kirtan became part of that. Secondly, it was definitely inconvenient to the then establishment. It was always advantageous to the then establishment to perpetuate a particular understanding of freedom movement, who contributed. So if we see most of the writings on national freedom struggle, we will come to understand it in a very specific categorization of three sections or three eras of freedom struggle, and wherein so very often the contributions even of the revolutionaries are brushed under the carpet for whatever reasons. And as I said, most of these reasons are ideological. Then the ideological influence on history writing. So in early phases and for almost 5 to 6 decades of after independence, history writing has been dominated by the communist ideology or communist historians. So with the influence of communism, there is a particular discourse of history writing, not just about national freedom, but in general about Indian civilization, about culture, cultural history writing. It has a particular ideological bias, and which is very evident. And as I mentioned earlier, the colonial hangover. So we have adopted the models of history and history writing, the ideas of so-called scientificity from this colonial understanding, which did not necessarily fit our own context. The methodological reasons, so in spite of those who were not necessarily influenced by the ideological reasons, as part of history writing, there were some methodological issues. The textual importance or the importance given to the text while doing history was something which limited the scope of methodology to look at those efforts which came from oral traditions or performative traditions. So performative and oral traditions, they were brushed aside, they were overlooked while writing history, and the oral and performative sources were considered as unscientific. Again, we can see here the colonial hangover of scientificity. So that is something which I think led to missing out on some of the stories of Indian freedom struggle. So Kirtan tradition, I'll quickly go through these slides because most of us know about what is Kirtan and how Kirtan tradition evolved in India. So earliest references to community singing, and here the word community is very important for me, one who deals with the ideas of public sphere and civil society. So the earliest references to community singing is with reference to Samagayan, which is mentioned in Rig Veda. Narada, Muni Narada is considered as the progenitor of Kirtan tradition. In Narad Bhakti Sutras, I began my presentation with this particular shloka: Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Smaranam Padasevanam Archanam Vandanam Dasyam Sakhyam Atma Nivedanam. 9 stages, Navavidha Bhakti. In different parts of India, and in different parts of India, some are other kind of Katha, Kirtan, Sankirtan. They are very popular. So yesterday somebody also was mentioning about Dashera and Ram Leela. So these performative genres are known by different names in different parts of the country, but every part of India has these traditions. So the stories of bhaktas, the stories of bhagwans and bhakti, these are prominent features almost of all parts of India, and wherever we have seen bhakti traditions, the prominent bhakti traditions. Making, so what is the purpose? So what Kirtan does basically, in a very classical sense, making sophisticated spiritual knowledge, or what we call as Sukshma Gyan, available to the ordinary masses, or to those who did not really had the access to Sanskrit scriptures, to Vedas, etc. So to the majority sections of people, to make available the Sukshma Gyan has been one of the greatest, and I would say landmark contributions of Kirtan tradition. So Kirtan, the term is borrowed from the Sanskrit root kirta, meaning singing praises of Bhagwan. Kirtan is singing praise to Bhagwan and great bhaktas of Bhagwan. It is a performance accompanied with music, singing, dance, drama, and play. Kirtankar is the main Kirtankar is the main performer and tells the stories, which is popularly known as Akyan. So I am talking particularly in Maharashtrian context. And Akyans are based on the stories from Mahakavyas like Ramayana, Mahabharata, Puranas. And there are three main purposes, and most of the literature on Kirtan would tell about these purposes. Again, there can be different numerations, but main three purposes are to imbibe in people bhakti and orient them towards Bhagwan, to comment upon issues of common interest, or what in social sciences we consider as common good, including social, political, economic, and give direction to the society, to raise overall moral standard of people. And most importantly, the term here that I really want your attention is unadulterated entertainment, especially in the era of OTT platforms, where there is so much of violence and so much of adulterated entertainment. Kirtan served as an unadulterated form of entertainment for centuries together. So when we come to Kirtan tradition in Maharashtra, it's popularly known as Kirtan itself, or Sankirtan at the most. So Nama Sankirtan or Kirtan, that's how Kirtan tradition is known in Maharashtra. The contemporary Kirtan performance, not just in Maharashtra, but I believe almost in all parts of the country, can be traced back to 13th century Sant Namdev, who came from Maharashtra in 13th century. Many Kirtan genres are popular in Maharashtra. Most prominent among them are called Varkari Kirtan, which is associated with Varkari Sampradaya, one of the most prominent Bhakti Sampradayas in Maharashtra. And the second genre is known as Naradiya Kirtan. So Varkari Kirtan and Naradiya Kirtan are two widely spread and most popular forms of Kirtan performances. Apart from these two, there is Ganapatya Kirtan, Shakta Kirtan, Ramdasi Kirtan, Das Ganu genre of Kirtan, and Rashtriya Kirtan, which is the topic for today's presentation. The style, choice of abhangs, the emphasis of message to be delivered may change according to genre. So what distinguishes one genre from other? So these dimensions, the style, the choices of abhangs, that is what distinguishes one genre from the other. So now coming to the Naradiya Kirtan, because why am I discussing Naradiya Kirtan? Because Rashtriya Kirtan is a subset of Naradiya Kirtan. So Naradiya Kirtan, how is it performed? Naradiya Kirtan is a popular genre of Kirtan. It has two main parts of performance. One is Purvarang. So before interval, Purvaranga is, we can consider as a part before interval, and Uttaranga is part after the interval. So what is Purvaranga? Purvaranga is based on a spiritual principle and its explanation based on the evidences from Shastras and Puranas. What is Uttaranga? Uttaranga is an Akhyan, or it is also at times known as Nirupan, which is a story based on the life of a person who implemented and lived according to the spiritual principle elaborated in Purvaranga. So there is a clear link between Purvaranga and Uttaranga. Purvaranga is principle based, is more philosophical in understanding, whereas Uttaranga is the practical demonstration from a life of a person who lived that principle. So generally, it is a story of a bhakta who lived those spiritual principles. Say, for example, if Purvaranga is talking about importance of Nama Japa or importance of recitation of name of God, then the stories of bhakta would actually signify how these bhaktas adopted recitation of name in Uttaranga. So classically, these are stories based on bhaktas like Uddhav, Prahlad, Pundalik, etc. Compared to other genres, Naradiya form of kirtan or Naradiya genre of kirtan accepts various sources of kirtan singing, possibility to address the needs of changing time. So as compared to many other forms of kirtan, Naradiya kirtan is much more flexible and inclusive. In terms of, say, for example, in 18th and 19th century Maharashtra, especially when there was a patronage by Peshwas, Naradiya kirtan also started adopting the other forms of poetry and compositions. Say, for example, poetry of Povada, the ballads, they were also accepted as form of kirtan performance. So this is about kirtan tradition, Naradiya kirtan tradition. And then we have, and then we come to the very specific genre, the subset of Naradiya kirtan, which is Rashtriya kirtan. Now, when we talk about Rashtriya kirtan, one of the most important person that we need to talk about is none other than Lokmanya Tilak. And I really don't need to talk about contributions of Lokmanya in Indian freedom struggle, because that's very well known. What is underknown or what is unknown about Tilak is his contributions towards Rashtriya kirtan. So what is the location and why do we need to talk about Tilak in general when we are talking about Rashtriya movement or national movement? If at all, biggest contribution that Lokmanya has done, and because of which he also gets the title Lokmanya, one who is accepted by people. That very title signifies that he democratized the Indian freedom struggle. The struggle, which was confined to merely writing applications and negotiating with the colonial rule, Tilak oriented this entire movement, Tilak oriented the struggle towards people, and he got people participate in the cause for national freedom. So that's his one of the biggest contribution, and for which he employed different means, including writing newspapers, so Kesari and Maratha, very well known, establishing social and political institutions in different parts of the country, and obviously his own speeches, organizing sabhas and masses. One of the most important dimensions of this was employment of religious festivities for the purpose of national cause. So very well known and much talked about is public celebrations of Shiva Jayanti and public celebrations of Ganeshotsav. So that is something that in our history books we often come across, and it's a well-known fact. But what is interesting for me when we read Tilak, so Tilak in one of the sessions, in one of the speeches had said that if I was not a journalist and if I was not a political activist, I would have become a kirtankar. So Tilak clearly understood what was the importance of kirtan as a medium to reach out to the masses. And with this idea, so he himself could not become a kirtankar, but he realized the importance of this media, and therefore he ignited many youngsters to take up kirtan as their vocation. So Rashtriya kirtan, what is the fundamental purpose of Rashtriya kirtan? To ignite and fill minds of ordinary people with Desha Bhakti and dedicate themselves for the cause of nation. The uniqueness of this genre is in Akhyan singing, the glories of great warriors of past like Rana Pratap, Shivaji Maharaj, Jhansi Ki Rani, Raja Chhatrasal are sung. Also singing of glories of revolutionaries and freedom fighters, including Tilak, Savarkar, Bose, Bhagat Singh, Madam Kama, all revolutionaries, is also part of Kirtan. The challenge in Rashtriya Kirtan in this particular context of early 20th century was to compose Purvarangas, which are based on principles of spirituality, and connect it to the lives of warriors or the revolutionaries. So as I mentioned, the Adya Rashtriya Kirtankar was Dattopant Patwardhan, who himself was a homeopath and who was well trained doctor from Government Medical College, Calcutta. And when he came to Pune after completing his education, he met Tilak. He got trained himself in Kirtan, and Tilak, in fact, inspired him to take up Kirtan as full-time vocation. So he is bursting medical practice. He closed down his medical practice and he took up Kirtan as full-time vocation. And around 1914, he started performing Kirtan and putting the stories of revolutionaries and great warriors instead of only telling the stories of bhaktas, orienting people to fight for national cause, orienting people to take up, to act in a very small manner towards the national cause. So, and for next 5 decades, he kept doing that. He traveled across the length and breadth of Maharashtra and even beyond Maharashtra. And unfortunately, when we talk about 75 years of our freedom struggle, our independence, we don't even know who Dattopant Patwardhan was. In fact, as part of my research, I came to know about this person and I felt ashamed of myself as a student of political science and political history. And a person who came from Pune and a person who is from Maharashtra, I had no idea of Dattopant. So that is unfortunate part of our history writing, unfortunate part of our stories of national movement. I'll conclude in next 2 to 3 minutes, Shivkumarji. So Dattopant composed several Purvarangas and Uttarangas. So about 110 Purvarangas he composed and 194 Uttarangas he composed. So that's one of the legendary contributions. And I often wonder what a person can do in a lifetime. So these were men and women of different heights. As far as Rashtriya Kirtan is concerned, and since I spoke about women as well, there were a great number of women who also were part of Rashtriya Kirtan and they were Rashtriya Kirtankars. So what are the contributions of Rashtriya Kirtan? First of all, because of Rashtriya Kirtan and because of this particular genre, those people who are formally not literate, who did not have literacy in formal sense, who could not read and write, especially newspapers like Kesari and Maratha, or those newspapers and pamphlets which directed people towards national cause and which were confined to a few urban sets and urban clusters. Kirtan as a, and especially Rashtriya Kirtan as a performative genre, it spread national movement amongst the rural area, amongst the rural people, and especially the majority section of people, those who were formally not literate. I'm using the term formally not literate because we do understand the difference between wisdom and literacy. Without losing the essence of Kirtan, which is bhakti, it oriented people to reflect, respond to the colonial excesses, and take up necessary action. Even in the post-independence era, Rashtriya Kirtan was widely employed to spread awareness of the government schemes. So very often when we study of national movement, we are often told that it was Gandhiji who made the who converted national movement into a mass movement. So when I start reading about this, what I realize is, yes, Gandhiji could make use of the base which was prepared in the earlier eras through the means of Kirtan, through the means which were employed by earlier leaders. So I'm sure I spoke up mainly about Maharashtra and Rashtriya Kirtan in Maharashtra because that's my domain and my terrain of research. But I would be most glad if you can come up with the stories from other parts of India wherein Kirtan or Katha were employed for the purposes of national struggle. And I think one of the benefits and advantages of this kind of gathering is we get to talk to each other and know these different traditions. So I end my presentation with this. Thank you again one and all for patient listening, and thank you organizers for the opportunity. Namaste.
Thank you, Vardaji, for a fantastic paper that has, it was moving. At the same time, you know, it has shaken our backbones to an extent that, you know, something that we ought to have known, we should have known these things, and I do not know what else we do not know. There could be many more things about especially I firmly believe that the history of India between 1857 to 1900 is not well written. And even in what is written of 1900 to 1920 is too selective. And it's only after that that we get easy resources. But I think there is significant opportunity space in the 1857 to 1920. A lot of missing links have to be filled. And I think we will reach out to you more. We need to plug this gap actually.
I would definitely like to contact to you personally, and please write, please through organizers we can get in touch with each other, because we need to tell our story of Indian freedom struggle from the margins.
Yeah.
Those untold stories need to be told, and we can collaborate, we can come together to tell those stories with a vigorous voice. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.